My name is John Ring. This past year was a tricky one for me, and in late October, I felt the need to put a stop to everything and get away from the world for a while, be totally alone, fly under the radar, whatever. Hide away and decompress and remember what it was like to be a human being. Through an associate, I got set up in an old fixer-upper of a farmhouse outside a little town in the Laurel Highlands, a 2-stoplight burg called Red Friend, 90 minutes southeast of Pittsburgh. Interesting name, Red Friend. The farmhouse was secluded just off the side of a road in a rolling valley, picturesque and silent if you dig that kind of thing. Everything was good for a couple of months, and then the ice storm came, December 29th. And didn't the good folks of Red Friend freak out about it? The gas station and the little supermarket shut down ahead of it, sure. Even hardcore Northeasterners get nervous about the damage an ice storm can do. It was all the same to me. The thought of being stranded cozily inside for 3 days, plunging back into my studies and my hobbies and listening to the Steelers trounce the Titans on the radio seemed just fine. But I made sure to walk the couple of miles into town at dawn and get some candles and sterno before the front really blew in. I cut it too close, really. Typical. One of my many faults. I left O'Hannigan's with everything I needed for the storm, plus a couple of steaks, and tried to avoid eye contact from the cashier as usual, pulling my knit hat low. When I need to get away from it all, that means not a lot of contact with the locals, too. On my way back to the house, the first flecks of ice started to fall. That was okay. I was safe on foot, nowhere near the main road. Instead, I took the scenic route. Something referred to on the map of the area only as Brambly Nestle. Look it up yourself. On the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation website, there's a PDF showing every unpaved road in the state. Brambly Nestle ran from Turnkill Road 2¼ miles to Route 30 east and west. There's lots of roads like these in that area. The only ones responsible for their maintenance are the people whose properties touch them. I'd counted signs of only 3 residents on that stretch. Brambly Nestle was an unforgiving, open green tunnel, a dense row of old oaks planted tight against its edges long ago, almost the entire length. At Brambly Nestle's widest, there was room for maybe 1.5 cars to creep along side by side. At its narrowest, anything wider than a box truck was going to have to make other arrangements. If you didn't slow down to about 5 miles per hour in those spots, you'd almost scrape the natural ruts that brought the embankment to knee level on both sides. The cost of real privacy. I figured the people living out there must have really disliked all other human beings. Brambly Nestle finally ended a few hundred yards shy of a convent it had originally been dug to serve. O'Hannigan sold the pastries they made. I'd sometimes go most of the way down and then cut through the woods behind the convent's berry field to hoof it the mile back to the house. On foot, Brambly Nestle got kind of creepy, really, even in daylight, but especially after sunset and before dawn, which is when I preferred to head out for groceries or to the liquor store for adult beverages. It was like this sleeping snake, curving and rising and falling. Trenches of rainwater collecting, muddy patches that went on for 100 yards. Why it needed to be that claustrophobic, I'll never know. I have a little touch of that, claustrophobia, little touch. I was walking pretty fast down the damp middle of Brambly Nestle at about 5:45, the sky just beginning to really lighten, when the ice got kind of serious real suddenly, a million cold little taps on my jacket and my hair and my face. I still had 30 long minutes to go when I saw a car blocking the path way up ahead. It was just sitting there in the early gloom, facing away from me, lights off. It had stopped at a real tight point. There'd be barely room for me to squeeze by on either side. I got a bit closer, not too much, just close enough to hear the engine wasn't running. It was a Volvo sedan with New York plates. Now, maybe you would have kept walking down Brambly Nestle and gone right up to the car, concerned someone was lost or might be having engine trouble. But I'm me. I'm different. I'm probably more suspicious than most. I stood on the road just watching the car for any signs of life inside it. The nearest house was a good half-mile away, the convent further than that. The car's progress had been stopped long enough to be covered with a very thin layer of precipitation, so nothing could be seen through the rear windshield even if I were to get pretty close. Strange. Then there was a sound, and that sound was the driver's side door creaking open very slowly. I could see a hand gripping the inside door handle and pushing outward in one long mechanical motion. It held its grip there, arm totally taut. The arm was wrapped in a thick, dark coat sleeve. I walked just a few steps closer. The hand did not release its grip on the door handle, not at all. Nor did the driver begin to emerge. All that happened was that seconds kept passing. I blinked away the frozen snow again and again. I was getting real cold. The guy, or the woman, they weren't getting out. I thought maybe they had spotted me and were waiting. Bad vibes, bad vibes. I turned and headed to my left, ditching Brambly Nestle entirely. I decided to take the traditional route, turning sideways between two oaks and crossing the field of weeds beside me where the tracks of any number of wild animals crisscrossed everywhere. I went in the direction of Turnkill Road. Screw it. I looked back over my shoulder just one time, and my eyes landed directly on that taut arm again, rooted in its mysterious position, like it was just an arm with no human attached. The driver wasn't wearing gloves. That bare hand must have gotten painful, slowly turning red, probably. I tramped across a string of fields and picked up my pace till I crossed Turnkill. Almost no traffic on it in the face of the forecast. Like I said, I'm a suspicious man. You've got to take care of yourself in this world. Someone driving a car like that sedan, wherever they were going, I was sure they had a cell phone, or someone on that road was expecting them. Or they could get on their feet if they needed help. We weren't quite in the middle of nowhere. They had another couple of hours before that spot would get snowed in. By the time I got back to the house, the wind was kicking up in a pretty scary way, and I collapsed on the couch from the sheer effort of the journey, which had been a hell of a lot longer than it should have been. Eventually, I built a fire and poured myself a hefty glass of 4 roses. We were in for a few hours of the nasty stuff. A few hours actually turned into like 14. The forecast of 4 to 6 inches of snow missed the mark. The front shifted, and the area got caught in a slow-moving band of the dreaded wintry mix, accent on the ice. By the time the power finally went out, and TV stopped yakking about the crisis, the yard's front and back had a flawless white blanket shrouding it 8 inches thick. I watched the storm out the window for a full hour as dusk fell. The ice made it all into something uglier than the puffy stuff I loved playing football in as a kid. The ice made it all mean somehow. It collected parasitically on the gutters and the power lines. Thousands and thousands of cruel, transparent spikes, waiting for a strong wind to send them randomly crashing down. That hiss it made in the air all day was like the speech of some disembodied insects hiding in the trees. The accumulation finally tapered off to nothing at 11 that night. I opened the front door and pressed one foot into a drift, hearing the surface crack. No plows would be coming along Turnkill Road. My rental SUV was kind of a featureless hump at the curb. I didn't sleep so well that night. Kept thinking about that arm, that sleeve, and that hand. It wasn't conscience bothering me. I'm a bit of a self-preservationist, as I said. It was that the image didn't calculate. Just me and my puzzle all day Monday. Yeah, a jigsaw puzzle. I only do the ones 10,000 pieces or bigger. I like to sit and patiently figure things out, so it makes sense. This one was a massive reproduction of The Lady of Shalott by John William Waterhouse, 1888. 7 feet long, 16,000 pieces. Cost me $150. I began to wonder just how long the area could go without power. Boredom crept in as I put the Lady of Shalot's sad face together. Then a bit of paranoia. Yeah. There wasn't a sound outside anymore. No wind. And it was still way too cold for the thawing of the ice to accelerate. No engines. No one was going anywhere. I drifted off Monday night and crashed hard. Stress. I woke up at about 1:30 in the morning and couldn't get back to sleep. And I decided suddenly to go back to Brambly Nestle. I told myself it would be a nature hike, a beautiful hike with the snow cover making the scene winter bright, like a photo by Ansel Adams. I needed the exercise, too. We'd see if at 46 I still had the energy to tramp through 8 inches of snow for an hour. I even packed some trail mix and used the sterno to make myself a thermos of cocoa, fit the whole thing in my coat pocket. The cold out there in the world was bitter, but endurable. I didn't even need the flashlight most of the way. The snow glare turned the sky a dull gray, every shape I needed described just clear enough to see. I felt like a ghost, crossing the property and then Turnkill Road, into the chain of empty fields and copses, to the tree line beside Brambly Nestle. I had to stop a few times to catch my breath, and I was completely winded by the time I got there, from lifting my feet high again and again to clear the snow. The oaks had kept the ground cover from getting too excessive on the road, but it still came to about 6 inches there. No footprints at all as I started traversing that lonely, twisting run. No tire tracks headed either way. Off in the distance, I saw that the closest house was fully dark. Seemed no one had a generator out here, or maybe the place was just plain vacant. And what I didn't want to see appeared just a few minutes later. The car, the Volvo, was still there. Still in the exact same spot. Coming at it from the front now, I saw that the roof, hood, and windshield were all buried in untouched snow. Far more disturbing, the driver's side door was still open. I took the flashlight out of my coat and approached. The second I switched it on, I caught sight of a deer at the rear of the car, sniffing around. The beam made its eyes gleam like rubies. It turned fast and bounded away, parting the trees. I crunched forward and circled the Volvo from the passenger side, where there was a little more room to maneuver between it and the embankment. Coming around the back, I saw the arm, the driver's arm, still outstretched and gripping the door handle more than 40 hours after it had first reached out. An inch of snow had settled on the coat sleeve in the time between. The flashlight beam showed me that the fingers, now frozen solid, had loosened their grip on the door handle, but never retracted. It was a man, an older man. He was sitting upright, but slumped to his left, the act of stretching out and opening the door having pulled him almost to the point of falling out onto the road. His head was down, sagging onto his chest. I pulled his head back by the hair. There was a tiny crunching sound as the layer of frost that had built up on him was broken. Bits of ice had speckled his skin, which was slowly going blue all over and marked by strangely shaped blotches. There was a gruesome bruise on the left side of his head, spreading around his ear and down his cheek. More colors had accumulated and swirled there. Brown, black, purple even. I shone the flashlight around the front seat. He was wearing a thick trench coat, and snow had settled into his lap and on the floor. A half-smoked cigar was in his lap, too, now as cold and lifeless as he was. Before it had petered out, it had started to burn a neat, nickel-sized hole in his coat near his left knee. I noticed a big, dark, lumpy mass on the passenger seat. Looked like a collection of black wigs secured to an oversized dummy's head or something. In order to reach it and turn it over, I was going to have to maneuver around the other side of the car. From growing up on a farm, I was fairly certain what I was looking at. I unhooked the dead driver's arm from the door handle and let it fall beside him, then gently pushed him more upright and closed the door. His window was rolled down all the way. That was something else that didn't make much sense in this weather. I opened the passenger side door, looking at the terrain around me. No one from the nearby properties could see this spot on Brambley Nestle from their distant vantage points, and certainly not in the dark. I was alone on the impassable road, a fair distance from its terminus near the convent. That lumpy mass really was what I thought it was. A wild turkey. Grandpa Billy was big on hunting them when I was a kid. I'd spotted their tracks during the season's first snowfall weeks before. It didn't look like this one had been shot, but it was dead, frozen solid, lying on top of a Rand McNally road map opened to the wide square area I had chosen for my winter sabbatical. I crouched there, knees touching the thin crust of ice atop the snow cover, shining my light on the dead man's face. There was no real question for me about his identity, despite how the frost had obscured his features. But if there had been a question, it was erased when I opened the glove compartment. All that was in there was the Volvo's owner's manual and a bottle of pills. I took them out and read the label. Blood thinners. So now I knew that Blitzer had managed to find me out there in Pennsylvania, 7,000 miles away from my true home across the Atlantic, and decided to pay me a visit. But as for formulating a theory about what had happened to him, that wouldn't come until after I was well on my way, trying to keep the visuals of that spot and the details the flashlight beam had shown me locked firm in my memory. I shut the passenger side door, circled around again, and took the keys out of the ignition. I popped the trunk. There were two interesting things inside it. One was a roll of thick plastic sheeting, secured on both ends with industrial-strength rubber bands. The other was a red Reebok gym bag. It was so heavy when I lifted it, I wasn't sure I'd be able to get it all the way back to the house. But now I was motivated, to say the least. I hauled it out of there and started walking. I had to shift that gym bag from arm to arm a lot to keep my shoulder from giving out. Blitzer had been packed for a bit of a stay, apparently. I went right down the middle of Brambley Nestle for most of the way, needing to stay unseen for as long as possible. I slipped on the layer of ice underneath the snow once and went right down on my face. Served me right. Headlights approached from the distance just as I hit the shoulder of Turnkill Road, as exhausted as I have ever been in my life. I retreated behind some trees until the plow rumbled by. He pushed a lot of snow onto the shoulder near my feet, but it was going to take another few passes until putting new salt down would even do much. The storm had won. There was no question about that. When I got in the house, I was sweating so badly I was dizzy. You can get hypothermia that way, you know. My nose stung. I dropped the gym bag on the dining room table, tore off my clothes, and ran a towel from the bathroom over my head again and again, drying my hair. Naked, I came out and downed a big shot of bourbon before I lit one of the candles I'd bought from O'Hannigan's and set it down beside the gym bag. Then I undid the zipper. I took out some of Blitzer's clothes and a Ziploc bag with toothpaste and shampoo in it and set it aside. Can you believe it? He'd brought a jigsaw puzzle with him, too. I'd gotten him started before things went bad between me and the wheel. 700 pieces, please. An aerial photo of old RFK Stadium in Washington. Just his taste. He'd played pro ball for 3 years for the Lions, which was how he got that dumb nickname 20 years after he got cut. When all this stuff was out on the table, it just left the object which had weighed the bag down so much. It was a Makita chainsaw, battery-operated, lean and mean. There was some sort of crude, bulbous attachment fastened with electrical tape to the front of the housing. I'd never seen something quite like it before, but you didn't have to be Marie Curie to figure out what it was. I tapped the main power button, stood back from the table, depressed the lock-off lever, and pulled the switch trigger. Instantly and cleanly, the chainsaw rumbled into life, vibrating almost carnally in my hands. But the usual aggressive, headache-inducing splitting sound was cut at least by half by the homemade muffler. I thought of all that plastic sheeting sitting inside the trunk of the Volvo. I tapped the off button, bringing the silence back. So that's what Blitzer was bringing to use on me. Rougher than I would have even thought, but that was the wheel for you. The wheel was sometimes about sending messages when messages needed to be sent, even if there'd be no one left alive to internalize them. So much for my guaranteed safe house. My fool brother had screwed up again. My former colleagues had managed to track me down inside of 2 months. But Blitzer had simply died on the way. I laid the murder weapon that was supposed to cut me into pieces little by little as I screamed and screamed down on the table. I put on some sweats and took another drink and stared into the fireplace, where the embers glowed a brilliant orange, and I tried to puzzle things out, slowly and methodically. You want to know what I think happened to Blitzer, as crazy as it sounds? As many times now as I've put the evidence together in my head, this is still the most plausible explanation I can summon. Picture Blitzer, age 59, behind the wheel of that borrowed or rented Volvo, creeping down Brambly Nestle to be as stealthy as possible in approaching the house where he intends to kill me, exploring that unpaved road a half-mile away in the pre-dawn darkness to see if he can leave the car somewhere and bring death to me through the woods on foot. I assume he was carrying his Ruger Red Hawk in his coat. I hadn't bothered to check. He's aggravated because he had no way of knowing Brambly Nestle was that narrow. Too old and thick-headed to ever get cozy with GPS technology was Blitzer, still hanging in there with a Rand McNally. Maybe he stops to check the map, trying to see just how close he is to my alleged safe house, or maybe how to ditch this ridiculous path. He puts the car in park, and then he lights up one of his Arturo Fuentes. The smoke gets a bit intense with an AF, so he rolls the driver's side window down. I'd seen him do it before. Or maybe he just wanted some air, cold as it was. And then, the thing you have to realize is that wild turkeys actually can take wing. If they're startled or trying to evade a sudden threat, they can shoot off up to 60 miles an hour for a good 10 or 12 seconds before they have to come back down. So let's say there's deer everywhere, galloping about as the snow begins to fall, or an actual predator, like an owl or even a coyote. And maybe a group of turkeys, or even just that one, takes off to suddenly evade it. It bolts. Confused or too close to the car to get sufficient liftoff, it flies through the driver's side window, where it nails Blitzer on the side of his big, cartoony head. The cigar drops. Maybe he's stunned or gets a concussion. That was one hell of a bruise. But okay, he probably doesn't lose consciousness at first. Then, though, see, that's where the blood thinners might tell a part of the story. He'd been on them for about 5 years, had a clotting problem in his legs. Told me when you're on the aggressive brand that he was, you bleed out far more easily than a regular person. He was always worried about a car crash. You could bleed out externally or internally. So maybe that turkey slams into Blitzer's head hard enough to start something real bad in the vessels in his brain. Causes him to pass out or worse. I wonder still if he ever roused himself at all after he opened the driver's side door and stuck that arm out. I guess not. At some point it was moot. The car runs out of gas, sitting all alone on Brambly Nestle. With the car door open like that, it gets colder and colder. Would have been a natural sedative. I believe Blitzer may have died because no one came along in the storm except me, the self-preservationist. Weird things happen in this world. Chance decides so much. I think that turkey wound up saving my life. Or should I say, whatever startled it, and it maybe caused it to fly wildly and blindly toward the Volvo did. This is the explanation I have chosen to be satisfied with, for I have no other. As I gazed into the embers in the fireplace, I knew there wasn't much time to spare. I'd already been too slow. I had to get out of there. At some point, the wheel would have expected Blitzer to call and confirm the job had been done. They would have wanted the evidence returned to them right away. And when they got no answer and developed even an inkling that things had gone bad, follow-up steps would have been taken immediately. It had been so long since I'd spotted the car. I don't rattle easily, but the thought of who they might send next gave me a shiver inside, because I couldn't help but think of Dr. Duramdeshar. It took me maybe 10 minutes to pack up my necessary gear and tuck my Colt into the waistband of my jeans. The key question was, how was I going to get out of there? It might take a half hour to dig the car out. Even then, trying to plow through the snow and the ice made it a seriously low-odds proposition that I could even get 2 miles to the highway without getting hopelessly stuck. Luck had swung completely the other way now. I could not have been in a worse position, with the clock ticking on my life. I pinched out the candle flame and stood in the center of the living room in the dark, visualizing the difficult hike out to the highway. It was almost 5, and the wind seemed to be rising outside. My puzzle of the Lady of Shalott sat nearby, missing great holes in the tapestry she'd woven in her lonely tower, the one she had draped over the side of her forlorn, drifting boat. In the end, I just had to roll the bones. I'd started to move to the front door when my paranoia, the only real protector I'd ever had, squeezed me like a blood pressure cuff. Maybe leaving the house through the front wasn't such a good idea. Maybe I needed to take a look out there from higher up before I made that call. I climbed the stairs one last time and went back into the bedroom I'd been living in for 8 weeks and parted the curtains. It was a view I'd seen dozens of times already, but now I didn't like how I'd be walking out in the wide open for a while beside Turnkill before I could make any changes to my route. I crossed the hallway into the unused bedroom for an overview of what lay south instead. So many trees that way, such undisturbed snow. Even more of a brutal slog, and twice as much time in the cold if I used that route to arc around past the convent and back toward the highway. I hated the idea of having to use the flashlight at any point in the dark woods, exposing me, though soon enough dawn light would reveal me anyway. But I was already too late. I should have known. I spotted something down below on the edge of the property where it sloped sharply into the woods. Movement. Someone was walking very slowly toward the back door of the house. A man, approaching it with planned stealth, wrapped in a tan trench coat. His hands were being kept warm in his pockets. Even through the dark, I could see his shoulder-length hair was tied back. Gray hair it was. My heart started to hammer in my chest. They'd sent the man of nightmares. Dr. Duramdeshar was here. He couldn't have flown from Cape Town. Not that fast. He'd been closer. Undoubtedly, along with a gun, his pockets were filled with syringes containing his personal blends, the concoctions which most amused him. He had nicknames for them based on their grisly effects on the body. There was one called Gusher. There was one called Jiggly Face. Long ago, Blitzer made me look at a picture of how one of those injections had made a man's throat expand and then explode. "This is why once you're in," he'd said to me. "The wheel can have the doctor prescribe a 48-hour personal hellscape for you if you stray, Johnny." I understood. The greater the horror, the more our efforts were judged favorably by, well, we were duty-bound. I left the room swiftly and crept down the staircase. Sound had become tricky. The ice in the trees outside the house cracked and buckled, and the wind ripped clumps of snow from their perches, and they thumped onto the ground below. So many harmless things I might misperceive unless I listened so close, not realizing I'd maybe actually just heard hands on a window pane, or a lock breaking, or a boot nudging open a door. The dark was my only friend. I drew the Colt and took a few steps down the hallway that ran all the way from the front door to the back one. I stopped just before the tasteful, tiny foyer with the basket of fake autumn fruit and a Georgia O'Keeffe print framed on the wall. I listened. I was finally rewarded. There was an audible hint of weight shifting gently just beyond the back door. Dr. Durham-Deshar was calculating, strategizing. He would not assume I was asleep upstairs. I crouched low and moved forward, mindful of the planks beneath my feet and how their construction conducted sound. I got to a spot within just 5 feet of the door, and then I stretched out on my stomach on the patterned throw rug before it, holding the Colt outward in both hands, pointing it at the door just above waist level. A gust of wind knocked tree branches together somewhere out there, and that soft thump of descending snow came again. I heard the flapping of birds, sparrows maybe. They don't migrate when the winter comes. Nothing moved outside for so long that I thought the doctor must have detected my own shiftings and was preparing for a sudden strike. My forehead began to itch insanely, but I didn't move a muscle. My aim varied not a hair. My nerve broke when there were 2 sudden jolts of sound outside, a crack from far away and then a hollow thud much closer. Thinking my assailant was trying to break the door down, I squeezed the trigger of the Colt, and a hole the size of a soccer ball appeared in the door, the report so loud I heard none of the splintering of the wood. My hands hummed under the recoil. I felt the vibration of the shot all the way to my stomach. I rolled fast to my right to avoid return fire, over and over, rolling right out of the foyer and into the sitting room I'd hardly ever used. I scrambled to my feet and threw myself against the near wall, pressing my back flat against it. The wind whistled softly through the hole in the back door, curled around the wall, and finally found me. But of the doctor, there was no sign, and no other troubling sounds from outside. There was a window next to me, and I pushed my head cautiously between the curtains and the frosty pane at a safe angle. From there, I could only see the very edge of the back step. I saw a black boot pointed upwards, as if its owner were lying prone out there. It didn't move. Playing dead was a fool's errand, because I was prepared to wait a long, long time before moving again. And that is just what I did, making my mind a total blank. I can't tell you how long I stared at that boot before I felt safe enough to crouch and maneuver back into the foyer, holding the gun well out in front of me. I positioned myself so that I could see the hole I'd made, and even through it on a diagonal. It was dawn when I finally opened the door, convinced my shot had worked a miracle. I was wrong about that, but there truly was nothing to fear now. Dr. Durham-Deshar was lying on his side in the snow beside the step, one leg stretched over it awkwardly. He had dropped his gun. Something very large had struck this terrible man from above. The ice-choked branch of one of the oak trees hanging menacingly over the eaves. This natural bludgeon was over 6 feet long. Spatters of blood dotted the snow. More had trickled out of his mouth, but its progress had been stopped by the cold. One of the doctor's eyes was open and lifeless. One was closed and unnaturally puffed out. For the first time in months, I laughed aloud, laughed most heartily. If you'd been there, you would have thought, that's the laugh of a man who has triumphed. And triumphed I had. I realized in that moment that it didn't matter who the wheel sent to kill me. Nothing would work. All the sorcery born from our years of collaboration, our travels, our schemes, our sacrifices, I had been chosen to receive favor. I was the one fortune would smile upon when it was needed the most. Mad jealousy, that's all this was. It had driven the wheel to overreaction. But chainsaws and syringes filled with biological terror don't mean a whole lot when the guy you're trying to kill is finally holding the trump card. I got on my knees and offered respectful thanks to the Emperor of Pentacles and the great witch Odine. And I left the house with a bit of a spring in my step. I wondered what would happen if a cop spotted me on Turnkill and pulled over. Maybe a semi with a drunk trucker at the wheel would come out of nowhere and plow into him. Or a black bear would dash down from the hills and have a little early snack while I strolled away on foot, humming "Some Guys Have All the Luck." I wouldn't press that luck, though. That would have been disrespectful to the prodigious gods we obeyed. I began the long, cold, tiring trudge back to civilization, where I'd see if maybe someone with a plow could take me out to where the roads were passable, and I could then pay some ambitious and discreet cab driver to take me far away. There was a moment on the first part of that journey when the terror did come back. I was about 100 yards from Turnkill Road when I saw a dark figure up ahead, standing in a patch of trees in the unblemished snow, tall, hooded in black, and I prepared to meet death, the death I thought had come for me as part of the relentless trickery of the world that Blitzer, Dr. Dharamdashar, Professor Cooper, and the dozen others who formed the wheel had chosen to dwell in beside me. Death will come for us because of what we do, Cooper had once said to me before he went missing. And when it does, it will enjoy the joke. It seemed the bargain I had struck for the gift of unexpected fortune, a bargain which had involved a lot of betrayal and a little killing, had backfired on me. Death had come. I froze in my tracks. But when the hooded figure turned around, I saw that it was a nun from the nearby convent. She was walking a German shepherd in the first gray light of morning. She was young, pretty, wore bright pink snow boots. I wished her a good morning and passed. She smiled at first, but when she got a closer look at my face, her smile faltered. She knew I'd been touched. She sensed something and stood quite still as I trudged past her and onward, one tiring snow step at a time. Good. She should have been afraid. I would have told her, I'm as scary as they come now, honey. True and terrifying invincibility is still a long, hard road ahead. But John Ring is finally on his way.